Welcome, everybody. I'm Tracy Schneider from Temple Emmanuel. This is our L'chaim program tonight. Our topic, our second session is called Aging and Thriving. While aging is a given, thriving is an option. And today in the center of your screen, we have Peggy Crawford, and she is our presenter. I also want to thank the Newton Senior Center for co-sponsoring this program and for sending out publicity. I'm very grateful that they did that. At the end, we will have questions at the very end, and I will stop recording before then. And we have a third session. I just want to make sure I encourage everybody to try to attend that last session on April 2nd. Handouts after tonight's program will be sent probably tomorrow for the third sessions and questions for the third sessions as well. So welcome, Peggy, and thank you so much for doing this series.
Thank you, Tracy. I have to say, it feels like much longer than 1 week since we were together. It feels like so many things have happened. So welcome back to all of you who were here last week. I'm very happy to be here. And I told Tracy that tonight, just in case there was anybody new, I'll do really just a quick intro. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have specialized in health psychology, which really is just about working with people who have physical health conditions and sort of all the issues that go with that, adherence and coping and stress and family issues and so on and so forth. Mostly in large medical centers. So I was in neurology at the Cleveland Clinic, and then at Children's in Cincinnati, and in neurology in Cincinnati. So lots of people with seizures and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, those kinds of conditions, children with muscular dystrophy. So I've worked with both adults and children and adolescents. So just about my personal background, just to repeat a bit of that. So I'm 75. So I feel like I have some age credibility here, have grown into that. My husband of many decades was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 7 years ago, actually about 8.5 years ago now, but died 7 years ago. And so that led to many disruptions and changes for me. Part of that was that I moved back to the Boston area where I grew up 4 years ago, and I live in Cambridge. But it was really a very different situation of going from what we anticipated was going to be our retirement in Maine, which is why we moved east from Cincinnati, to suddenly like being on my own. We don't have children. My husband's whole family has died, including his sister when she was just a child. So I kind of felt on my own, and then COVID came. And so that was another sort of big transition. So I've gotten involved since then in volunteer activities, and we talked a little bit about the establishment of the kinship group. Because people without kin there's more and more of us, and at more risk of social isolation and loneliness, those sorts of things. I just wanted to say a word about that. Another group that's at high risk of social isolation and loneliness are people who are caregiving for someone else later in life. That's a high risk group. Even though you're with someone, the chances are that you could feel pretty alone with that. So let me go to the slides. And what I was saying to Tracy, which I did not explain very well, was that I have fewer slides tonight. So I'm going to wait and go through those and then go to the discussion. So let me just move this out of my way here. All these pictures. Okay, it's not exactly. I didn't mean to do that. Okay, hold on. Okay, so this is session 2, so Thriving as We Age. And so we're going to talk tonight about relationships between aging and thriving, characteristics of people who continue to thrive with aging, and then some ingredients that are needed for ongoing growth. Okay, so excuse me, in preparation for the discussion break, which will come towards the end here. So just as we did last week about thinking about what words or phrases come to mind when you think of thriving, I'm sorry, when you thought of aging, tonight you're going to do that with thriving. And think a little bit about what relationships you see between aging and thriving, because you may come up with some that I haven't come up with. And what have you observed and experienced with someone you know that you think of as thriving while they're also aging? And also, what things can disrupt thriving, requiring some sort of recovery? Kind of as I said to you when my husband died, that was a major disruption to thriving. And it took me a long time, and I'm probably in some ways still working on that. Okay, so I have looked up thriving. I like words, and I like to look at what do words mean. And when you look up thriving, there are many definitions, but it's growing, it's expanding, developing in a healthy and strong way, moving forward, prospering. And it has always felt to me like there is movement implied, but it doesn't necessarily mean physical movement. It could be emotional movement or relationship movement, doing something differently that maybe other people wouldn't necessarily even notice unless they're in those relationships with you. And I think being open to the possibility of change, that you may need to change or that your life is going to continue to change. I think all of those things are really part of thriving. So this is one of those lists of words which came from our wonderful kinship group. So everybody independently just came up with words or phrases that for them they associated with thriving. And as before, the ones that are highlighted and capitalized, those are ones that more than one person came up with. And I've highlighted resilient and underlined it in this way because I want to talk a bit specifically about being resilient and what resilience is all about. So you can see that there's a lot of words here that have a very positive connotation, a lot of growth and freedom. And also, as people age, what they're saying is they have sort of an outward focus, that wanting to be available to other people, to help other people, but also taking care of themselves. And thriving is certainly associated with various forms of strength here. I like having quiet time. So sometimes people want some solitude as they age. So you may have come up with words that aren't here, but I thought the group did a really good job of coming up with lots of words that they associate with thriving. So what is resilience? It was one of the words there, and clearly there's a lot of overlap between resilience and thriving. So there are lots of definitions for resilience, but it is that ability to rebound from some adversity, hopefully feeling strengthened and with more resources. Being able to adapt to setbacks and changes, so some flexibility there. Finding ways to regain a sense of balance. You know, I always laugh to myself when I talk about balance, because in older age, most of us are concerned about balance. I go to a fitness center that is geared specifically to older people. And when I look around, people are always involved in doing balance exercises. And I think I told people, like, about getting close to 2 years ago now, I fell down the steps of the Belmont Library and had to have knee surgery the next day, and I caught my heel and lost my balance. But this is kind of a different kind of balance. This is sort of an emotional balance, or an interpersonal balance. So balance is kind of an interesting part of aging. So implementing proactive steps, sort of anticipating issues. And if you think about some of what we talked about last week, all of those lifestyle choices, taking care of your physical health, your emotional, social, behavioral health, and your cognitive health, if you put things in place, those are all proactive steps to try to help and protect your health. Standing up for yourself in difficult situations, I think, is part of resilience. I'll give you an example here. I have decided I have my annual wellness visit next Thursday. And whenever I go in spite of the fact that most of my blood pressures are really very good at home, it is always very high when I go into the office. So I have been very regularly taking my blood pressure and keeping records over the past 6 weeks or so. So I'm going to go in there with all of those blood pressures, and I am going to refuse to let them take my blood pressure at the office visit. And this is a regular primary care person I've had now for a number of years. So I'm going to really stick to my guns. But I thought, why am I putting myself through this? I'm going to advocate for myself. And one of the things that's really important to think about with resilience is that while some people seem to be born more resilient than others, they just kind of come into the world that way, any person can become more resilient with practice. And most of us get better at things we practice, and that includes resilience. Okay, so characteristics of resilience and thriving. You'll see the overlap here. So I think of these as my 4 Ps: purpose, passion, persistence, and patience. People who are resilient and in the midst of thriving, this is how they live. It doesn't mean 100% of the time. And anybody who is characteristically sort of a thriver is not doing this 24/7. They need to recoup, they need to rest, and sometimes they need to take a pause from all of this. But they tend to be hopeful and optimistic people while acknowledging and dealing with challenges. And we know, studies have now shown that people who are more optimistic and more positive about life and positive about aging actually live longer and are happier and are healthier people. People with resilience and the ability to thrive focus more on what they can do rather than what they can't do. And this comes out a lot in the language that people use. You probably know somebody who is always saying the but about things. I can't do that, but I would really like to. But so again, people are flexible, adaptable. They view experiences in life as opportunities for learning, so that being a lifelong learner is consistent with this. Being kind, empathic, and supportive of others. And it's interesting, I read some paper recently that being kind as you age is another one of those characteristics that results in a much better aging process. People who are willing to challenge themselves and move out of their comfort zone. And we're going to talk more about comfort zones at the 3rd session because we're talking more about change. But doing things that make them uncomfortable. Seeking help and input from others. This is really hard for a lot of people. Many of us think we should just do everything ourselves. But in fact, it takes courage to let someone know that you need their help, and takes courage to accept the help from people. Resilient and thriving people are also practice self-care and self-compassion, which means sometimes saying no so they can recharge their own battery. But I think this whole issue of self-compassion has become very front and center in our lives. And I think I'm going to say this, I don't know if there are any men on tonight, but women seem to have a particular problem with this. So women, when you talk to them about doing these kinds of things, giving some time to themselves, taking a break, not overcommitting, say, well, that's selfish, right? It is not selfish. This is back to that old issue of, when you fly with someone who needs your assistance, if you don't put on your own oxygen mask first, you are of no help to other people. So lots and lots of overlap here. So I wanted to tell you about someone that I met after I moved here. And this is Woody, my hero and champion thriver. I do a lot of walking in my neighborhood, and I repeatedly saw this man walking. I could tell he was probably older than me. He just kind of looked older than me, but he was always zipping along. And I thought, after a while, I just I crossed over to his side of the street, and I just stopped. And I said, excuse me, you don't know me, but I see you out here walking all the time, and I just wanted to introduce myself. So this is 88-year-old Woody. And I got his permission. I was talking to him out on the street, out on the sidewalk recently. And I said, I'm doing this program about thriving. And he goes, oh, I love that. And then he said, but I'm also a survivor. And I said, I know. This is because I've known him now for a couple of years. So he went on again to repeat that he has survived 5 or 6 life-threatening illnesses, including pancreatic cancer, because he was able to have the massive surgery and whatever. And so he describes these illnesses as interesting. His life's work was as a biologist at MIT. So he's interested in science. And that's how he thinks about these illnesses. So he walks regularly in the neighborhood. His most recent life-threatening illness in the past year was a heart attack. That was one thing he announced to me one day. I encountered him out on the street. He's out there no matter what the weather is. So he's got his rain hood up and, whatever. And sometimes I see him, not because I'm out on the street, but because I'm in my building and I happen to look out. And then I think to myself, okay, Woody's out there in the rain. I'm in here. There's something wrong with this picture. He takes rest breaks, which he didn't used to do. And he has various places along the road where now people know him. And he has this one place that he particularly likes to go, a nursing facility, because he likes the chairs in their lobby. And when he walks in, everybody goes, Woody! It's sort of like walking into Cheers. So, and he now uses a cane, which he said is really good for his balance. So I reinforce that. He does yard work, household chores. He loves crossword puzzles and sports. He's engaged in our community. I see him at various community events. And I was at a GBH, public radio program one evening, and I was checking in, and I felt this tapping on my shoulder. And he called me by name, Peggy. And I turned around and it was Woody. And I was so happy to see him. So he waited for me, and then we went and found his wife and whatever. So Woody is out there. He is engaged in the world. And he refuses to complain, he said, because no one wants to hear it, including him, about these life problems that he has and all these illnesses. And this man is never without a smile on his life. So I don't know if you've ever heard of 3 Good Things, but there is a resource on your list that you will get after tonight's program, and it is for the greater good in action. This is a science-based practices for a meaningful life out of University of California at Berkeley. And I would encourage you to go onto the site. Everything is free, but they have an exercise, a practice called 3 Good Things. And it is extraordinary. It takes 10 minutes. the intent is that you write down every day, you identify 3 good things that you experienced as positive. And preferably they're things that you were actively engaged in, maybe you brought them about. And you can give details about why it felt good to you and so on and so forth. This has turned out to be a useful intervention for depression. And you don't have to do it continuously, but even after doing this for a week or 2, the impact lasts for months. And it's free, and it really makes you appreciate and sort of come at life from a different perspective. And when I see his smile and I see him coming down the street, because we're usually going in opposite directions at that point, Woody is one of my 3 good things for the day. He is just a terrific person. So how are aging and thriving related? We're going to get into these relationships. So I wanted to share with you a perspective from one person, and it is from one of our own. So this person said, while aging is unavoidable, the goal is to counteract its effects to the fullest extent possible and for as long as possible by doing what we can to thrive. I'm all for that. And this is somebody I know now fairly well. And I got her permission and she said that I could use it for the presentation. So I think this very much goes with what we talked about last week about all those different ways we can attend to our health, and with the hope that we are going to feel well and be around for a long time. So I want to give you a sense of some other relationships between aging and thriving. So clearly, as we age, we have continued opportunity for thriving. And so even if we try something and it doesn't work, we can try again. So more than likely, an opportunity will come up. Thriving, we know, can positively affect all components of our health, all the ones we talked about last week, our quality of health, and very likely our longevity. So why not, right? There's very little downside here, if any. And I want you to really take this to heart, that even small successes, when we make efforts to thrive, can motivate us to keep trying, to try again. So it's very reinforcing. That's just human behavior. We do something, we do it well, we get positive feedback, not just giving positive feedback within ourselves, but getting positive feedback from other people. It can really keep us motivated. But thriving can also be disrupted as we age. And as I said, my husband's diagnosis and the 18 months of treatment, some of which was traumatic, not just to him, but to me, that was incredibly disruptive. So how do these disruptions occur? So unfortunately, there are lots of ways that they can occur. So an unexpected accident, like the one I had falling down the library steps, was the first time, I think I said this last time, first time I ever spent a night in the hospital in my whole, I think at that point, 74 years. You can have an injury, unexpected accident, another injury that results in this disruption. You can have surgery, so you can have a recovery period. So it kind of gets you off course, it interferes. And I spent a lot of time in the past week trying to come up with a word for this disruptive nature of all of these events. And I really couldn't come up with a better word than disruption. So I would love it if any of you have ideas what might be a better word, please let me know. But you might have the onset of an illness. It could be an acute illness. People could have COVID, people could have the flu. People could just have a fever for a few days or something. It's disruptive. Or you can be diagnosed with a chronic condition that now you're going to have to attend to every day. You're going to have to do things differently, perhaps. You can have a reduction in your resources. This could be your physical and emotional energy could be reduced. Your finances might change. Your circumstances might change. Someone close to you might die. In February, I had the anniversary of my husband's death, and literally a week to the day later, one of my very dearest friends died. And so I'm sort of thinking February has become not quite my favorite month, so I'm going to figure out a plan. But in the midst of that, I did have a wonderful Zoom with an 8-year-old friend of mine and his 6-year-old sister and their mom. And his birthday is on Valentine's Day. And so he told me a lot of really good knock-knock jokes during that Zoom. And so that was a positive disruption in this otherwise kind of very sad month. But people become divorced, and actually the divorce rates as people grow older are going up. That used to be something people thought of just for younger people, but more older people are getting divorced. Separation, and here I didn't mean sort of marital separation necessarily, but I was thinking of sometimes people become geographically separated. Somebody in your family moves away, or a really dear friend moves away to be closer to her children or something. People may have to move. All of those things are disruptive. People can develop significant anxiety and or depression. And it's very hard to function in your usual way if you are significantly anxious or depressed. When you're depressed, it's kind of like walking around with rocks in your shoes. Even small decisions become difficult. You might have unsuccessful efforts at thriving, and that leads to discouragement, feeling like, well, this doesn't work. I had somebody tell me that once about meditation after trying it once. Well, this doesn't work. I said, well, you might have to practice more. And I think attempting to thrive takes practice. I also wanted to say ageism in healthcare is a real disruption to our thriving. And somebody mentioned a great example last week and about ageism. I think when he went to a medical visit with his friend, and the provider clearly it sounded like didn't feel because of this person's age there was much to be done, or they didn't deserve to have something done or something. And it was very interesting because since we last met, again just a week ago, I happened to be looking up some things on ageism, and NPR came out with a program on the 7th. So 2 days after we last met. And I put it on the resource list for tonight. But the idea that discrimination based on, this is what ageism is, discrimination based on a person's age, it turns out, is surprisingly common in healthcare settings. And it's basically about making assumptions because of our age. Assumptions are made about our hearing. I don't know if you've ever had an experience where you're older and people are like literally yelling at you because they assume you don't have normal hearing. They assume you have memory problems. If you're with somebody, if someone accompanies you to the visit, often what people notice is they don't talk to you. They talk to the person with you, particularly if that person is younger or something. They make assumptions about our physical functioning, what we're able to do for ourselves. They also make assumptions about our knowledge or our lack of knowledge about our own body and health. Let me give you an example. I had an experience, an unfortunate experience, about 1.5 years ago or so, where I was getting this really weird sort of discoloration under my eyes. I'm very kind of pale, light skin, whatever. And I thought it looks like black and blues or something. And at the same time, I had this sort of itching and roughness on my eyelids. So I thought, okay, this had happened always in the winter. January, February. So I thought, okay. So I asked my primary care, I said, I think I want to go to Durham about this. And she said, absolutely. So I got in the very next day, talked to the resident, and then the attending came in and he said, okay, I'm going to give you this mirror. And he handed me this big hand mirror. And he said, okay, now I want you to look in this mirror and tell me, where is it that you think you're having these changes on your face? I was so mad. So what I said to him, I said, you know what? How about I show you the pictures on my phone? I have to tell you that shut him up really quickly. As soon as I showed him a whole bunch of pictures, he's like, oh, okay, got it, got it. And so then he sort of backed down a little bit. But, you know, I have another, one of my favorite examples. I worked when I worked in neurology, I spent a lot of time in the MS center. That was where my main office was at the Cleveland Clinic. And I remember a woman who was in one of my therapy groups, she, in the community, used a wheelchair. So she was telling, this was a women's group. So she was telling the group how she had gone out to dinner with her son and his family recently. And that she was so pissed off, she said, because the waiter came over to take the orders. And he said to her son, what does she want? And the woman said to him, it's my legs that don't work, not my mouth. And we were all, she was a very feisty person. But I think you can see that when people treat us consistent with ageism, it really gets our dander up, right? And it's good if we can, in a calm way, speak for ourselves, speak up. So I think ageism is very interesting in this NPR piece, but they talk about how this can lead to overtreatment and undertreatment of older people. Overtreatment is when people are prescribed lots of medications and procedures. They're just kind of piled on. This gets particularly problematic when we see multiple providers. And this is the age of specialty. So everybody usually is seeing multiple specialists. And I think, you know, computerized records were meant to address this problem. That is not necessarily what has happened. And so I think not everybody even looks thoroughly through the records. It's very interesting that in a lot of cases, the most consistent person in our life who has a good sense of our medications is our pharmacist. So don't ever underestimate the usefulness of your pharmacist. But this ageism can also result in undertreatment when our concerns are dismissed, when it's like, well, this is expected at your age. And so as a result, people don't receive the care. People might not for what they need and deserve. They talk about, they speak to Louise Aronson in this piece, this NPR piece. She's a geriatrician in California. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her book, Elderhood, that she wrote. But it's all about trying to, I think, improve medicine again. But what she says, I thought this quote was really interesting. We've made old age into a disease, a condition to be dreaded, denigrated, neglected, and denied. So I have not read her book, but I was in another discussion group and this came up. And so I actually have ordered it. I hear it's a little bit dry, but I really want to read it. So I don't know, I'm going to get it before we meet again, but I just think this ageism in healthcare is something for us all to be aware of. So how do we experience these disruptions? So when those events or changes occur, I think what it may feel like is that our way forward gets blocked. We can't continue to go forward. Or maybe it feels like there's suddenly a detour sign ahead in our life. One of the things I thought of about the detour sign, though, is that a detour sign assumes that if we go a different way, we will still get to our destination. But the reality is that sometimes we need to change our destination. And that was certainly true for my husband and myself. we were not going to have retirement in Maine. That was really true. So while detours can be helpful, they can't always get us where we really want to go. Sometimes with this disruption, we get distracted with something that feels even bigger, or more important. And sometimes this distraction can come from somebody else in our life who has a disruption. And then we're trying to be helpful perhaps to that person. So trying to divide ourselves up in too many fragments. Life feels out of balance when we have one of these disruptions, and it's not always easy to regain our balance. Just like with the balance exercise I was talking about. With more distress, we push our pause button sometimes for some relief. Sometimes this is on a temporary basis, and sometimes it becomes a long-term use of the pause button. And again, something else that happened in the past week since I was with you, I talked with a really good friend of mine in Erie, and as I was talking about some of what we've been talking about in the program and what I was going to talk about this week, she said, oh my gosh, this thing about the pause button, that's me. She said, that is me. Now, this is a fellow psychologist who I've known for 30 years. Bright, a wonderful person. And she said that when COVID started, she's basically an introvert. And so initially she said, well, this is going to be good. I can stay in the house. I can just walk the dog. The kids are out of, they're grown, they're out of the house. This is good for me. But what it turned out was that she never unpushed her pause button. So since COVID, she's been functioning at a much lower level and acknowledged, and she's acknowledged this before, she actually became depressed. And she said to me last week on the phone, she said, you can use me as an example during the program. And I said, okay. So you can see I have some really good friends who are willing to share their experiences with us. So I think we need to be careful. Pause buttons are useful, but it's not meant for long-term use. We feel stuck, maybe even immobilized. So again, immobilization is not just physical. And we don't always know how to get unstuck. Sometimes one of these experiences, one of these disruptions can feel like a kick in the butt, okay? A wake-up call, an opportunity for change and growth. And I just want to say a few things about my husband who used his diagnosis as one of these wake-up calls. So my husband was 70 when he was diagnosed. Still working, still the primary investigator on his NIH grant, and then also doing part-time at Boston Children's, where he had trained many years ago as a psychologist. So a busy guy gets diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he normally would not be very open with people about personal things. He immediately told friends and colleagues, although he did call his NIH project officer first. That was just who my husband was. You have to take care of business first. But he started telling people, and then about his treatment and about what was going well, but wasn't going well, and how he was feeling. And I was shocked at this. And then we started using CaringBridge. That's a free site where you can go in and put in journal entries and let lots of people know what's going on with you and your situation. It was very helpful. And he started participating in that. And again, was very open in writing. He always wrote part and I wrote part of every journal entry. And he also was somebody who went from almost never using his cell phone to having it with him at all times and keeping it charged. He took it to bed with him when he napped because he did not want to miss contact with people. Students, old students calling him, people that he had recently mentored who are now all over the country, and colleagues. And I would get these frantic calls from people and they would say, oh my gosh, Peggy, I just woke him. He was taking a nap. I know he needs his rest. I'm like, no. What he needs is to talk to you. That was good. Don't worry about that you woke him up. He's always leaving his contact information with everybody. He also told people what they meant to him, some of which I didn't find out until after he died, but and how he felt about them, and sort of closing those loops. And about 3 weeks before he died, we were having what we became known in our household as kitchen talks. And so I finally said to him, I said, look, you know me, I'm very curious. What happened here? You're suddenly Mr. Talkative, talking about your feelings and all of this kind of thing. And he said to me, I know you've been waiting a long time for this. And I said, well, that's true. But in fact, this is a gift. This is a gift you're giving me and other people. And I said, so what got you going down this path? And he said, I decided I needed to live differently in order to die. And I was like, And I have thought about that conversation. So this is a dramatic example. I appreciate that. But in fact, for some people, they make really, really good use out of one of these disruptions. All right, so we're almost at the end here. So I just wanted to leave you with some tools, ingredients and tools for growth. And you notice the picture I chose over here to the right, it's a tool belt, not a toolbox. And that's very purposeful for me, because I really feel that people need to have tools that are readily available. And tool kits and toolboxes are usually in a closet somewhere, or we even forget where they are, or we forget what's in there. And so I want people to think of building your own tool belt. And you're not literally going to wear it, but if you insisted, you could. And you want a variety of tools. Someone in an audience, when I was giving a talk and I stressed, oh, you know, you want a good variety of tools. She said, well, what if I want 5 screwdrivers? And her husband, who was sitting next to her, looked at her like incredulously and thought, like, what is she doing? Disrupting the talk. And anyhow, and then I said, well, you know, come back and talk to us when you have a nail that you need hammered in. And she said, oh, okay, I get your point. I get your point. Anyhow, I think it helps when you're thinking about making change and thriving to identify potential benefits, because this really helps with your motivation level. Why do you want to do this? You're going to do it because you think it's going to help you in some way. You're going to feel better. You're going to feel better about yourself. Also, I think setting goals is useful. You want to be really specific when you set goals. And you also want to start small, and you want them to be measurable. And so you don't want to pick something like, we've had a lot of talk recently in the kinship group about decluttering. Always something people want to, well, you don't say I'm going to declutter my home. That's like too big, and that would be overwhelming. And then what happens is people don't start. So if you have a drawer you want to declutter and you want to work on it for 15 minutes, I think time frames are really helpful, not when you complete the task, because some tasks are just sort of chronic. You want to consider something perhaps as a goal that you've put off, that you've talked yourself out of doing. People are really good at talking themselves out of doing things. You want to think about being willing to try without knowing upfront whether you're going to be successful. We don't always know the outcome, so it's a bit of risk taking. And you want to combine action with thinking. You don't want to get stuck in your head just circulating the same thought over and over and over. I was trying to explain this rumination to a man, a patient of mine, who was we were relatively new to each other. So I was talking about rumination, and he said, Doc, is that kind of like a cow chewing its cud and never making any milk? I was like, oh my God, that's it. I said, can I use that example? So he got this big smile on his face. And when he came back for the next visit, he said, I bragged to my wife that I have taught you a technique that you can use in therapy. And I said, and I am extremely appreciative of that. It also helps if you really give some thought to what might come up that feels challenging and an obstacle. This is not negative thinking. This is just being prepared, and then how you might reduce that, what actions you could take. And I also think it helps to go public. Tell someone, preferably someone you trust, what you're trying to do so that they can give you encouragement. They can be your cheerleader. They can give you support, and they can also give you feedback. It's useful, I think, particularly if it's something that's visible to other people, and behavior is one of these things. If you say, like, this is a behavior that I'm working on, that I'm trying to change, and then periodically you ask somebody with whom you regularly interact, so I've been working on this, what do you think? Does it seem like do you notice anything different about me? And again, if it's somebody who knows you pretty well and you trust them, they will be honest about that. So I think that can really help. It's like having a coach. Okay. So now we are going to go to our discussion break. So I'm going to unshare here. Okay. So,
Peggy, if we're going to discuss now, then I'm going to stop recording.
okay.
So thank you so much for this. We're going to discuss now, and I'm going to stop recording to give people privacy. So give me 1 second. Thank you so, so much. This was really, some of the quotes that you had and the stories that you told, I was writing all types of things down. Really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that. Stop.